Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library's Meet the Author series. My name is Denise, and I'm in charge of adult services for the library system. And I really appreciate your coming out today. Hope that you'll go to the back of the room and enjoy tea, coffee, or hot chocolate. And thank you to the Friends of the Library for manning the welcome table. But above all, I want to thank the Gwinnett Remembrance Coalition. They're here with us today. They have a table in the back of the room. And after the program, I know they would love to talk to you about their mission and the things that they're working on. And they were a wonderful support to us with this. You can't hear? Best we can do, ma'am. The sound system in here isn't the greatest. You might want to move up a little bit closer. That might help. Introducing our authors today is Dr. Paul Grant. He is a professor of political science at Georgia Gwinnett College. He is a member of the Georgia Gwinnett College Sustainability Committee and co-founder of GGC Communities Microfarm, amongst other things. And we also have the honor of working with him on our program called Community Conversations. I give you Dr. Paul Grant.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out on a chilly Saturday morning. But we're in for a wonderful program this afternoon and an opportunity to learn a lot about what's going on currently relating to these challenges that we're having in education and a pandemic. So we're fortunate to have two outstanding scholars who are local, who we're fortunate enough to hear from this afternoon. Let me tell you a little bit about them. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. James A. Taylor, PhD. He's worked in public education for more than 40 years, having served as a teacher, a high school principal, executive director, and associate superintendent. He's earned a doctoral degree from the University of South Carolina and completed additional graduate study at Auburn and the University of North Carolina. And as I was reading this, I was trying to figure out during football season who you cheer for. That must be confusing.
I should be close to the best.
Okay, there you go. He is also the author of From Unequal to Unwanted: Reforms Needed to Improve K through 12 Public and Higher Education. He is a consultant with Taylor & Taylor Education Consultants, a company he owns with his wife, Wendy Taylor. And now I'm going to introduce Wendy. Wendy W. Taylor holds a doctorate in educational leadership and management from Capella University, and also has a degree in education administration from the University of West Georgia, and an additional graduate degree, master's degree, from the University of South Carolina State University, as well as a BA from the University of South Carolina. I have to ask you the same question. Who do you cheer for? There you go. She has worked in public education for 23 years, having served as a counselor, assistant principal, and director. She is a consultant with Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement and CEO of Taylor & Taylor Education Consultants, a company which, as we know, she co-owns with her husband, James Taylor. So I am so happy to have the opportunity to get this started and kick this off. And like I said, it couldn't be more timely as we are addressing a pandemic and are very concerned about making sure that our children stay current, that they don't fall behind. So they will speak to some of the challenges that many of you who are out here are probably also educators are facing today. I've said enough. Let's go ahead and hear from the experts. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Having worked in a school, I can project, so I'm hoping everyone can hear me with mic or no mic. That's just how I am. again, I want to thank all of you for coming out because it's a nice sunny day, and I know you could be anywhere else than here at the library, but I do appreciate all of you coming to support us and to hopefully just listen and learn to some of the things that we would like to share. So to begin with, I wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown of the book itself. Just to give an idea, for some of you who've already purchased this book, you've had it for a while. Some of you are just hearing about the book and may purchase it. Either way, we would like to think that this book is a great resource for teaching and learning, okay? So just a little breakdown. That's going to be my part for a while. It is, scan here. There are 297 pages, so just under 300 pages. And even though that may sound like a lot or overwhelming, it's really, really not. We broke it down in a very easy way to follow. There are 8 chapters in the book, as you can see. Each chapter begins with what we call an essential question. Now, if there are any educators in the house, I know one for sure, but essential questions are important. You start off by asking the question, so you go into each of the chapters with a mindset of what you're looking for, what you want to get from that chapter. We have quotes at the end of each chapter. I love quotes. It does kind of put that little thinking cap on so that you can really reflect on maybe what was intended. And it is a nonfiction book. This is not a fiction, okay? This isn't just a story we are telling. This is a research-based resource that we would like for people to be able to use. So my 101-year-old godmother purchased this book. She's reading it, and she's like, okay, it's going to take me some time. I'm really slow. And some of it may not be pertinent to what she would want to know about. So I told her, start at chapter 7. That really gets you where you want to go, you know. So you don't have to start at the first page and end at the last page. It is a resource, and that was the intent when we actually spent the time to write this book. So let me just start with each chapter. Now, I'm not going to delve deeply in it. I'm giving an overview. In chapter 1, like anything else, we have to have a background. Everybody understands the need for background knowledge. As educators, that is what we do. So there is that history piece of it. And that's what we start with, the history. Now, Jim is going to get a little bit more into that part of it, but we all understand and know that the reason we have a history is so that we can actually know how far we've come. That's how we know we've made progress. But it also guides us to where we go next. So that's important. Chapter 2. In chapter 2, we discuss what we call the cultural gap. Now, you know, living here even in Gwinnett, which is a microcosm of what we are seeing in the U.S., diversity, a lot of diversity. I worked right up the street at Lilburn Elementary School. I was the principal there. Had 45 plus languages spoken there. Okay, we had kids from all over. We had poverty. We had kids who had come from out of the country. We had linguistic challenges, children with all kinds of languages that they were learning. So diversity is a part of our culture. What's happening, this isn't about just race, this is about culture. What happens is sometimes we have what we call a gap in our understanding of each other's culture. I mean, we have a southern culture, northern culture, rural, urban, so all of those are cultures also. So we delve deeply into understanding cultures. But what happens is sometimes those gaps in understanding each other are created. And we've heard of other gaps, achievement gaps, opportunity gaps, generational gaps. So there are gaps all over. Our job, our expectation is that we figure out ways to close those gaps. I think Audre Lorde said it best when she said, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." Chapter 3, teacher preparation. Now that may, for some, seem to just come out of the blue. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. Teachers are the backbone of our education. Everything that we do, we depend, all of us have had a teacher. If you've been to school, you've had a teacher. Okay, so that is critical. And they are under a lot these days, more so than ever. Just listening to MSNBC today, 55% of teachers nationally are looking at leaving the profession, retiring early, changing. There's a lot of things going on that we need to really pay attention to and listen. And we need to listen to their voices, because that was the one thing that came out of that news report, and I'm just tossing this in, is no one's listening to their voices. There's a lot of things that have happened as a result of the pandemic that have changed the course in a lot of how they have to approach things now. So we cannot continue to always pick up and do the same things the same way and expect a different result. We all know the definition of that. That's insanity. So we really have to start paying attention. But in the book, we talk about teacher preparation. One of the things that I learned, and I've been in education for some time now, many of the teachers in college are not actually getting the training that they need. Yes, they are very educated with the art of teaching and the science of teaching, and they really get that, and that's great. But many are not prepared to teach the students that will be in front of them, that are going to be sitting there. All of these diverse students, they weren't trained on that. And hence, in lies part of the problems that creates these gaps, these opportunities of communicating. So we delve really into that quite a bit in how teachers are prepared, not just in college, but even after they become teachers. And any educator we know, that never stops. That's ongoing, continuous training and learning and that is what education is. You don't just stop and, okay, I've got it, and that's the end. But we cannot inundate them with things that are not relevant to moving our students forward. So we get really deeply into that as well, which leads to multicultural education. What is it? Why do we need it? We delve into a lot of that in the book. We believe that could be a part of how we fix some of the problems that we are seeing, how we close some of the gaps that we experience. We create a model that could be used. When I worked on my dissertation, I actually did it in my school because it was so multicultural. Everything that could be there was there. Languages, cultures, and children were from every country that you can think of. But the majority of the teachers that I had in the school really reflect what we see nationally overall. Do you know that 80% of the teachers in classrooms these days are white, female, middle class? Just think about that and the multicultural children that they are having to work with. It's nothing wrong with them, but that is what we're talking about when we say this gap exists and how important it is to create the relationships to understand. And no, I don't speak Spanish, even though 65% of the students in my school were Spanish speakers. But that did not deter creating relationships, engaging, accepting, celebrating, acknowledging. Those are the things that close the gap. And that's where multiculturalism comes in. Early childhood education. Now, anyone who knows me knows how important early childhood education is to me. When you think about it, they only have a small window of time that we can maximize their learning at an early stage, when their brains are developing. Those are the crucial times. Many of our children were not even ready to enter school at all. They weren't ready. They didn't know how to do school. They didn't know how to sit, how to socialize, how to get along. They didn't know those basic things, let alone things like knowing their colors and knowing their letters and knowing how to count. Things that I know we hear a lot of people say, well, that's the parents' job. But when parents are working 2 and 3 jobs trying to feed their kids and trying to keep a roof over their heads, the next thing you know, they're 5 and they can't wait to get them in school so that they can start to learn. But many of them were already 2 years behind when we got them. And sometimes catching them up becomes such a huge disadvantage. Not just for the kids, but for our teachers. But they do it anyway. And they do it greatly because of the fact of who they are. They are teachers. There is overwhelming research on this one topic of early childhood education. Research has been done for decades about the lifelong benefits that early childhood education actually produces. For every dollar that you spend on a child on the early years, you benefit $7 on your return investment. All you have to do is think about how much money we do invest in our jails and prisons, which for many of our children, sometimes that path goes that direction. And we spend a lot of money. We need to really start to look at the benefits, the long-term benefits, the lifetime benefits of having early childhood education. Frederick Douglass said, "It is easier to build strong children than repair broken men." That's just a powerful statement that really makes you think about it. Then we get to chapter 6, Obama versus Trump, 2 divergent federal agendas for public education. Now, why do we throw that in there? Because every time there are changes in administration or leadership of this country, sometimes, not all the times, but we focused on these 2 at the time when we were writing the book, there becomes a different focus, a different priority about how we address public education. What's important? What's not important? Where do we focus? Where do we put our funding? Where do we put the money? What do we start doing? What new initiatives do we do? What new initiatives, what other initiatives do we pull away from? Do we focus on early childhood and access to college, or do we look more at vouchers or school choice? All of those become the discussions that change the way our federal government looks at our public education. And that's what we're talking about, public education. Okay, so then we get to chapter 7. Chapter 7, the collision and its impact on America. And I'm not going to talk too much on it because Jim's going to talk about it in depth, but I'll leave something for him to talk about. Anyway, so that will give you the essence of the book. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, and this collision between what is going on creates our urgency to write the book. So I'm gonna stop right there because I'll tread into his territory, and I don't really want to do that. But Number 8, action needed. One of the things we wanted to make sure that we did in our book, one thing I know as a leader, in any situation, there's never a problem of coming up with all that is wrong with something. I mean, you can ask people, what is wrong? What's wrong with education? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? We can come up with a laundry list of a lot of things that are wrong. And it's true, maybe there are. But we also wanted to at least attempt to address strategies and ideas and recommendations and thoughts and models of how we can fix things. It may not be the ultimate fix, but it's not just a book of complaining and talking about what is wrong. It is actually addressing areas that we were interested in as educators, because we are educators, and then trying to leave something that we can also leave everybody with as a model for how they can fix it. So I'm going to sit down before I get in trouble. I think that's I think that's all I have to say right now. I'll be back up later.
I love that woman to death. She's verbose sometimes. But she's passionate, excuse me, passionate. Okay. Now I'm going to get in trouble. What I want to do, this book is broken up, the various chapters. In Monday, I'm going to present 3 slides. And these slides, for the most part, we think this book will take you on a journey. And what we want to do in these 3 slides is take you on that journey. That journey begins with America's past. Now, when you think about America's past, let's go back just for a moment. In that first stop, in America's past, we lived in what was called a separate but equal society. That's just a fact. Segregation was legal. In 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision said, while segregation maybe in certain aspects of our society were legal, it's unconstitutional in public schools. So what happened in 1954, the Supreme Court says, that's unconstitutional. We have to desegregate all of our schools. And as you look into this picture, what we see on this slide, it indicates that there was massive resistance to desegregation. It was massive resistance at all levels. You scholars, who is that and what is that about in that slide? Ruby Bridges. I was talking to my granddaughter about a year ago, and they studied Ruby Bridges in school. She's a middle schooler. And then it dawned on her after Wendy made her realize, Ruby Bridges is still very much alive today. That's not so far removed in the past. I think she's 67 years old today. But this is a picture that depicts a 6-year-old first grader going to school in 1960, and she had to be escorted daily by 4 federal agents. That's just a reality. This is not about politics. This is about delving into the past so that we know what transpired then. And the thing about it, if you think about it, she was 6 years old attending William Frantz Elementary School, F-R-A-N-T-Z, in New Orleans, and all of the teachers except one refused to teach her. She was taught every day in a classroom, one-on-one, with the teacher named Barbara Henry. Just the 2 of them. No other teacher would teach her. There were no other students in the class with her, And you look in the book, you read about it, you see that inexplicably the next year, Barbara Henry was terminated. She had to go back Massachusetts. That's just a fact. Sometimes the truth stings, but in this book, what we want to do and what we have done is we take you back into the past so that you can see where we were. And that's just a reality. And again, this was massive resistance in elementary school. There was also massive resistance in high school. The book goes into the detail about the Little Rock Nine. They were discriminated against. The book also goes into the massive resistance in higher education. George Wallace standing on the doorsteps of the University of Alabama saying, you all aren't coming in here. But for the National Guard and the president, it would not have been integrated. So again, what this book talks about is the past, during the separate but equal period, how things really were. Sometimes, again, we have to open our eyes, and that's what we tried to do in the book. And although in 1954, with the Brown versus Board of Education decision about saying that segregated schools were unconstitutional, how many scholars we have out here, when were schools finally totally desegregated in the United States? In 1954, they said, you got to stop it. How long did it take? When was it? 1980, 1970. It was 1975. You're close. 1975. Total desegregation. Again, that's where we were in the past, and the book chronicles what transpired during that time. Now, the second stop is the present. We call this the aftermath of the Great Collision. The second stop, 2020. Let's focus on 2020. Not all of us were here in 2020. Even my little grandbaby was here in 2020. Okay? Let's go with January 2020. What happened was the first recorded case of COVID in the state of Washington was recorded in January of 2020. And didn't take long before it began to spread, and Americans were tense, they were angry, they were shuttered up. Again, so in 2020, this is when it started. Then, if you want to look at the so-called temperature of America in January of 2020, the temperature was kind of hot. Hot, not so much in terms of the weather, but in terms of the anger and the frustrations that Americans felt in January with the onset of the virus spreading. Then we moved to February, the very next month. What happened in February 2020? The book talks about the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And what transpired was some moderate protests on the heels of that murder. And the book talks about how the temperature began to sizzle. Remember in January, it was kind of hot with the COVID coming in. Then we go into February with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. We're already shut up, and we see this, and what happens? They begin moderate protests begin to happen. It started to sizzle. We moved from hot to sizzle. Then in March, there was another murder, almost in succession. Breonna Taylor. The protest became a bit more intense. We had major protests. And we say in our book, for the most part, the temperature began to boil. So we moved in January, it was hot in terms of the unrest in our country. In February, it sizzled a little bit with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And in March, it reached a boil with the murder of Breonna Taylor. Finally, by May, same year, 2020, the murder of George Floyd. That's when we had massive protests. The temperature exploded and created the great collision that we refer to in our book, and hence the title. The pandemic and the racism of those murders clashed. And what happened with the great collision? It reverberated worldwide unrest. y'all have already figured out where is this picture taken that are protests in response to the George Floyd murder. Paris. There you go. Worldwide. From Berlin to Belgium to Paris, there was a global, international reaction. And if I may, as a point of privilege, let me just read one in page 242 in the book. Summarizes it. Just when the COVID-19 pandemic collided with the murder of George Floyd in 2020, it created an imperfect storm. Because of that storm, the rose-colored glasses were removed and the face of systemic racism was exposed. The world became equipped with 2020 vision, and the imperfections in America's society were magnified. So that's what we refer to with the imperfect storm. All of these events culminated in a greater and heightened sense of awareness of what had been camouflaged for so long. And we chronicle the reactions to this. So again, there were national and international protests. Simply stated, the world was fed up with systemic racism in all shapes, fashions, and forms. Now, we move from the aftermath. We talked about the past, the present. We know what's next. The future. What does the future hold? This is the third stop in our journey. We peer into the future. I'd like to think, I'm an optimist, that the future of America is in good hands because there's an emerging multicultural generation that embraces diversity. Taylor, would you stand up? I didn't even know she was coming. My granddaughter, I did not know she was coming. That's her quote. She did not study her quote. I sent her a text one day as we were nearing the end of the book. I said, Taylor, 12 years old at the time, what do you think racism and all of this divisiveness is going to look like in 20 years? 12 years old at the time, student at North Gwinnett Middle School. She texted me back within a matter of 10 minutes. It might have been less. This was what was on her mind at that particular point. So she didn't have to study it. So what it tells me is that this new generation already has it ingrained in them. We see what they're doing out there. We see how divided and they are. But guess what? We're going to fix it. That's where this comes in. How it impacted public education and how to fix it. So again, you can read it. I hope it's not an issue, but with the changes that people are trying to make, there's a chance that it, meaning racism, won't still be a problem, especially because the new generations, I never told her about Generation Z, Gen Z, this is her. Gen Z are more unified than the previous generations. The next generations have the power to fix what the previous generations have done involving the earth and racism. After that quote, yes. After that quote, see, sometimes we as adults don't know when to put a period after things. After that quote, the next sentence says, enough said. There's nothing else to be written. Enough said. They have the power to fix it. Close the book. We're done. That's our future. I think our future is in good hands. And one thing that we do in the book, and I'm going to touch on how we fix it, essentially, we give the readers and educators a 9-step process of how to fix it. Essentially, that process involves 3 components. We're going to break it down very simply. Awareness. Sometimes people, once they become aware of something, what's the next step? You know, it's kind of like you have a blemish on your face, a spot. I made you aware of it. What's the next thing? Okay, I'll look in the mirror and then I acknowledge it. They made me aware that there was a spot on my cheek. I'm aware of it. Now, I look in the mirror and I acknowledge it. She's right. What's the last step? Action. Too many people and too many organizations are stuck in where? Acknowledge. Well, we know it's there. We see it. They made us aware. But they fail to go into that final step of action. That's the problem. So again, we discussed that. I'm briefly going to tell you my story, and I'm going to be very brief with this because we want to save time for question and answers. Personally, I've experienced public education in separate but equal. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina in the 1950s, early 60s. In my elementary years, segregated schools, all segregated schools. My father was military. I was fortunate in my middle school years to spend time in Germany, Augsburg, Germany, and Seattle, Fort Lewis, Washington. It's more closer to Tacoma. And during that time, I experienced desegregated schools. And then in my junior and senior year, we came back to South Carolina, and I re-entered segregated schools. Why am I sharing this with you? I'm being brutally honest with you. Like I said, I've been in segregated schools and integrated schools. As a young black male at that particular point in time, I cannot remember a single name of a white teacher I had. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. Don't misunderstand me. That is not a racial statement. It's more of a cultural statement. It was like most of my white teachers just didn't know how to connect with me. That was the problem. In many instances, maybe they weren't trained. But here I am, an adult. I couldn't remember a single one. But I did remember most of my black teachers, even as far back as first grade. Why? They were nurturing, and they cared, and they connected. That's the essence of education. If a teacher engages a student, that's when learning occurs. If they don't engage a student, it hinders learning, you know. My college years, very briefly, I entered the University of South Carolina in 1966. I was the second wave of students to integrate the University of South Carolina. I won't go into all of the horror stories, but what didn't kill me made me stronger. You know, I experienced discrimination then. We didn't have Google. Just one story I'll share with you. I wrote a paper once. Mind you, we didn't have Google and internet. The professor went all the way over to the library and double-checked all of my references. Every last one of them, you know, just to make sure. He found one that was a little shaky, so he said, you know, you can't get an A, you know. So he had to go to the library, go to the bookshelves to cross-reference what I had written. Now, I submit to you, you think he did that to every student? Don't answer. And finally, my 40 years in public education. It's in my DNA. I love it. I'm passionate about children. I'm going to go to my grave being an educator. That's where my heart is. This book is purely, I'll emphasize purely, then when you close us out, this book is about education. I hate politics. I am not a politician. I am an educator. Wendy?
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Okay, so I think, let's see, how are we with time? Okay. I think I've given you the breakdown of the book. Jim is giving you more of a little bit of how we took our journey through this book, how during the pandemic, this is what we did, okay, including his haircut.
I used to have hair.
That's why that picture. So then you see pre and post. Okay. Just thought I'd throw that in. So Jim did give you a little bit of, so we've gone over the book and given you what we have in the book, how it's broken down, what you can expect to see, and why we wrote it. And then he also gave you a little bit of his background, his personal background, of his educational experience. So I'm going to end with that as well. My public education experience also, I grew up in the South, small town, South Carolina, and from the time I started school until I was a 10th grader, I was in segregated schools. I was in a small town. We had 2 schools for blacks, okay? And in fact, I'm in the process right now with a childhood friend. We're writing a documentary about our experiences with that. It's really telling when you start going back, because it's, on the one hand, it seemed like so long ago, and on the other hand, it's like, okay, that's my lifetime. This is my life. This is part of who I am. So even though 1954, like we said, was when Brown versus Board of Education took place, it was very, very, very slow with their deliberate speed to get to us. So that's what we experienced. Now, as a child growing up, it was great to me. I mean, I was fine. We felt loved. Everybody knew us. In fact, a teacher see you in the grocery store, on the street. I mean, they knew you. They knew your family, and you just prayed they didn't tell your mom and dad something, you did in school, because that's just the way it was going to be. Everybody was involved in your education and in your life, whether we wanted it that way or not. That's just the way it was. And when we talk about the community, being a part of raising you, that's what we experienced. I remember, because I was old enough now, we were getting ready to go to high school. Right at the end of my 9th grade year, our principal called us into the gymnasium, and he told us, full of gymnasium, he said, okay, well, I'm letting you all know that we're closing down our school. Of course, you can hear the moans and groans. And we will be building a brand new school that you will all attend. And this will be your first experience with going to school in an integrated, integrated school. And so, we've coexisted, whites were in their schools, blacks were in their schools, but this was the first time we came together. So integration, I got to experience it up close and personal. And honestly, it was terrifying. It was tumultuous. It was massive resistance. It was National Guard having to come and break up fights. It was dismissing school early because we couldn't go on because it was so much disruption. I went through 3 principals in the first year. The first one quit after 2 weeks. The second one came, he stayed to Christmas. The third one stayed after January. It was very difficult. It was very, very difficult. It was a lot of fear, a lot of, like I said, resistance. And it wasn't all from students. We had parents throwing things at our buses and things like that. So that's my life. That's my experience. It never made me a victim. It just made me a stronger proponent for education. We knew how important it was. Now, it didn't remain like that throughout the rest of my high school. Things calmed down. And part of it was because I think we all finally broke those walls to get to know who we are as people. And we realized there was not that much difference over time. And hence the benefit of having it where kids always have gone to school. See, when they started, like my younger siblings, they never knew anything other than. But I had a different experience. Then my college years, I've had the advantage of being able to be in University of South Carolina, but during the time that I was there, it was very few of us. There was no connection. I didn't have many people to go to. A lot of things were on your own. You might have been 1 in 50 in a class, and you expected to know everything there was. If somebody asked a question about black people, like, why is everybody looking at me? So, you know, being in that space isn't unusual for many of us. I know lots of people have had that experience, but I also had the opportunity to go to an HBCU, okay? So, you know, that's the benefit of having various experiences. And I think it just builds you up, makes you stronger, but education is in my DNA. I talked to you a little bit about my dissertation earlier, that, you know, that was part of how I wanted to focus. I really wanted to focus on how important it is that we accept and embrace and learn about all cultures. We're here, you know? I think its statement says that diversity is a fact. Equity is a choice. Inclusion is an action. But belonging is the outcome. And that's what we all want to get to, where people with children all have a sense of belonging. When we have that, learning takes place. It will happen. They do make progress. So as far as my experience, that's been my experience. As far as our career, I've had the opportunity now to have been involved in, between the two of us, 60 years of plus education. You know, I've worked with early childhood education, elementary, middle. He's done high school, alternative schools. I've worked with rural, urban, suburban, had the opportunity to work with leaderships throughout the state of Georgia and in South Carolina, even with DJJ. Children are there too. We've gone into the prison and worked with students there too. They're everywhere. And if you're a true educator, you go where they are and you meet them where they are. So I see some of our elected officials in here. I wanted to acknowledge them. I mean, maybe they could stand up. All of the elected officials, please stand up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so with all of that, we also here with our own company with Taylor & Taylor to continue the work. And we have been advisors, educational advisors to nonprofit organizations. Mr. J.T. Wu, could you stand up? This is someone that I would like to introduce. And he's also running. He's a candidate. So we have some elected officials and soon to be, hopefully, some. And, but nonprofit organization, we work very closely. So we are advisors to people on the national, state, and local stage. And I appreciate all of you coming here. I know that my time now is up, and if there are any questions, we would be glad to answer any questions. Can you stand up and ask a question?
Yes. My question is going back to the belonging. And particularly now, it feels like we are somehow going back to the 60s, right? So how do you create that sense of belonging when there is so much hate and so much whitelash against black people because of the political arena, but it's targeting the schools and it's targeting the children with hate bills like the House Bill 888 and so many more stepping up? How do you reach that belonging in America?
That's a very good question. And I wish I had the one and only answer. Poof, there you go, it's fixed. But you said it started in school. I challenge that it's not in the schools. It started outside of the schools. This, when kids, honestly, I was a counselor as well. And one of the things that I ran into when kids had conflict, if adults sometimes just get out of the way, if we just step back a moment, you would be amazed at how they navigate communication to figure out how to resolve conflict. Most of what is happening in our schools has nothing to do with our kids and our students. And unfortunately, they are the ones feeling the brunt of it. Okay, they are the ones feeling the brunt of it. So I challenge just to say that we have a long way to go, and you're right. Sometimes I've lived it, and I feel like, gosh, I've lived this before. You know, a lot of resistance, a lot of negativity, a lot of divisiveness. But like I said, we need to separate the two. There's politics, and we know sometimes we cannot take it out of our schools, but we have to be careful that education is about education, and politics is about politics, and we just need to figure out how to make sure that we are addressing those. Jim, did you want to? And I know that.
That was good.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Representative McLeod. Yeah.
I remember when she just started the book, and we were just trying to make sure that facts was facts. A virus does not care about our skin color, it's looking for a place to live, and our bodies serve that purpose. But I wanted to I know that you all are educators, but let me say the politics is getting dangerous for educators. My heart is truly broken. I can't tell you that it's been already a difficult session. The amount of bills that are coming through for banning books, for demonizing teachers. I have suggested to my colleagues, and that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to get some counter-narrative bills in place. But I can't tell you guys how much we need you all to be participant in this process called the United States Republic Democracy. If you're not in this process and part of this process, we're going to lose this republic, and representative democracy will not. We just encountered the most anti-democratic process in the State House on Thursday. I'm having a difficult time because people stood in lines to vote for people that they felt they wanted to represent them. And when people describe areas as conservative and this, by the way, redistricting is about a process after census. When you describe a place as bedroom, suburban, district, you are describing something that is not required under law for a district. One representative basically drew a district in the north that is predominantly white in a majority county, and yet they brag that they love the diversity, yet your action tells me different. So you can say what you want. This book is a very timely book, and the Taylors wrote it because it was so important to see that intersection between race and a pandemic. And we're living through this. We are part of this history. And I'm just asking everybody in this room. I am State Representative Donna McLeod. I'm also a candidate for Congress in the 7th Congressional District. But right now, I'm here as a state representative for you to understand I need you all to step up, or we're going to lose everything, and the kids are going to pay the price. I have a grandson in the public school system, so I'm highly invested in this as well. But we cannot allow people to tell us what we cannot read, because we know when ignorance is when you can control somebody. And we can't allow any government or anything to control our mind with policies that are based on lies. And so I'm so grateful that you guys wrote this book and we're having this ability to talk about this. And I just want to bring this up because although nobody wants to be a part of politics all the time, it is everything. You pay taxes. And as a taxpayer, $30 billion we collect at the state level. 76% of it comes directly from income and sales tax. Now the 12% comes from fees, and the last 12 from business taxes. But at the end of the day, you all are the foundation of our government. And you deserve a return on investment, and you deserve laws and policies that reflect our existence together. Knowledge is the most powerful thing you give to yourself. But the vote is the most powerful thing we give to each other. And I ask you guys to stay engaged.
Thank you. It's 2:00. Do we have any other?
And just one more.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I have a two-part question for you. I know that you and your husband are both dedicated educators. You can feel that in the way that you speak. And my first question is, taking that aside, what was your inspiration to write this particular book during this particular time? That's the first question.
Okay.
And what or who is your target audience for the book?
Okay. Since I'm always talking, I'm going to let him answer.
Two-part question, and I don't know that it's a very simple answer, but one, in terms of why we wrote the book, we were shuttered in during the pandemic, and we wanted to do something beneficial. I got tired of just walking around shaving my head saying, "What do you think of this?" You know, and looking at TV. But as lifelong educators, as we started to do our research, it really resonated with us, as Representative McLeod said. You know, we are in a crisis. So many of our kids are falling through the cracks. You hear things like systemic racism. I don't want to dwell on this, but everybody has an opinion about it, but no one, it's like it was a hypothetical construct. What is systemic racism? I know I'm digressing just a little bit. You know, there are 5 institutions in America, 5 major institutions. And for the most part, through our research, we realized that those institutions are white controlled. And that's where the racism, when you have the haves and you have-nots, and when there's discrimination, we didn't see it, but once you started delving down, then you see it. What are those institutions? Education, banking, law enforcement, criminal justice, employment, housing. Those are the major institutions. And then we started doing our research. We were saying, well, criminal justice. You look at the system. You see something like 13% of the population is black in America, somewhere around there. But what percentage of the prisons are black? The inmates, 40%. Then you start looking at these things. Then you start looking at wealth, banking. You realize that on average, the average white total family income is about double that of the average black. Again, not so much about race. We started uncovering these things and said, well, we need to write about it. You know, we need to educate people, make them more informed. It goes back, now I'm getting ready to answer your question now. It goes back to that 3-part continuum. What we wanted to do is that first one, A, make people aware. If we can educate them and make them aware of some of the things that are going on in the various systems, then they will acknowledge it. They will say, oh, he's right, they're right. We see these things. You know, when we hear about housing, you realize that blacks, in terms of home ownership, is the same today as it was in 1975. Virtually no change. But for whites, home ownership is increasing. So by making people aware, and once they cross-reference, as Wendy's indicated, this is nonfiction, it's factual. And in the index, all you got to do is look it up for yourself. So you're now aware, you've acknowledged, now there's action. And we'd like to think that because of that great collision, there have been action in various parts of our society. Not so much because of us, but when people acknowledge and then realize that action is needed, action is taken. How many of you, and again, I'm not digressing, but I'm just trying to amplify the point. Like after the great collision, Quaker Oats decided, whoa, Aunt Jemima on our pancake box ain't what we need. So they decided we better do something about that. Because those rose-colored glasses, now people have 20/20 vision. They see, well, Uncle Ben, we need to do something about that. Fairfax County Public Schools used to have a high school called what? Robert E. Lee High School. The school board said, we're going to change the name. They're now John Lewis High School. You know, so these are all facts. So our purpose, to answer your question, is to make people aware. And once we heighten that level of awareness, they begin to acknowledge, and it motivates them. As Representative McLeod said, to do something, to act. She made us aware of what's going on in the State House. That is motivating me to act. We are making you aware of what's going on in education. Hopefully that is motivating you to act, to demand change. So that's the pure essence of the book. From an educational standpoint, is to make people aware. And we're providing facts. And everything that we say in that book, you look in the glossary and the index, and you can find it for yourself. So.
Thank you very much. Very powerful. I think of it as A to the third power, because awareness and acceptance without action is really nothing. And thank you for that reminder. And thank you all for coming out today, and for Dr. Paul, who did our introductions. Books are still available for sale, and I ask now that you line up on the side of Dr. James, and they would be happy to meet you and sign your books. Thank you all for coming out today on behalf of the Gwinnett County Public Library.
Yes, I will. Oh, and make sure you get a book. But still leave it.